My sister gave my son a DNA test kit for Christmas to nuke my marriage, but Karma nuked hers when her own daughter took one too. We found out her kids weren't her. Hi, my name is Linda. Every Christmas, I return to my parents' house in Lake Oswego, even though deep down I know I don't belong there. I look around. My mother is busy arranging gifts, my father adjusts the speakers, and old carols play on repeat. Then Natalie, my sister, appears as if she's making her grand entrance for an audience that exists solely for her. Dark red sweater, softly curled hair, the scent of expensive perfume slipping through every hollow hug. She's always known how to walk into a room like she owns it, and everyone, including my parents, lets her. I stand at the corner of the table, a glass of wine in my hand, listening and counting down the seconds until the evening ends. David, my son, is sitting under the Christmas tree stacking Legos with Ethan, my husband. The two of them are the only reason I'm able to stay composed. My boy is 11, bright, obsessed with science, and never cares for appearances. Yet tonight, I notice him glancing toward the adults' table now and then, maybe sensing something in the air. Natalie walks over, her smile polished into a weapon. "I know you love science," she says sweetly, "so I got you this a DNA kit. You'll have fun with it." Everyone laughs, probably thinking it's a harmless joke. I don't. Ethan looks up, his eyes meet mine, and I can tell he heard the undertone too. Natalie tilts her head, still smiling, and adds with a playful tone sharp enough to cut. "Should be interesting, let's see if you take after your dad, or someone else." The words drop into the air like a stone breaking the surface of still water. The music, the laughter, the clinking of silverware all stop for a single beat. My mother lets out a nervous laugh, quickly saying, "Oh, Natalie, you always have your little jokes." My father clears his throat, raises his glass, and tries to change the subject with a toast to a peaceful new year. But the silence after her words has already done its work. It creeps into every glance, every half-finished sentence, every strained smile. I keep mine steady, the kind of smile you wear to survive in a family like this. A smile that feels nothing. The wine glass in my hand tilts slightly, and along the rim, I notice a fine crack forming. Just a thin line, but I see it clearly, like a prophecy. Ethan placed his hand on my shoulder and gave it a gentle squeeze. I heard Natalie's laugh stretch across the room, her voice dripping with false innocence. "Hey, don't look at me like that," she said. "You know, science never lies." I took a slow breath, set my glass down, and forced myself not to meet her eyes. Inside my head, memories came rushing back: the day of her wedding, her little jabs dressed as jokes, the countless dinners where I sat in her shadow, the family's golden star. Natalie always had to win, even in things that weren't meant to be competitions. I looked at David. He was holding the gift box, confusion flickering in his eyes, not understanding why the room had gone so quiet. I smiled and brushed his hair gently. "Say thank you to your aunt," I whispered. He looked up and said, "Thank you, Aunt Natalie." She winked at him, then turned to me with that familiar look, the look of someone who's just planted a poisonous seed and can't wait to see it sprout. I leaned closer and said softly enough for only her to hear, "You should be careful what you plant, Natalie." That night, on the drive home, snow began to fall. The flakes tapped gently against the car window like soft knocks, steady and rhythmic, but all I could hear in my mind was the crack of glass from earlier. I knew this was just the beginning of something that had been brewing since the day I was born. It started with the way my mother looked at me throughout my childhood. Natalie was always the star of the Scott family, and I was the rational one, too cold, too serious, as my mother liked to say. From a young age, I learned that fairness in our house was nothing more than a bedtime story. When Natalie broke a vase, my parents said, "She's just clumsy." When I spilled a glass of milk, my father's tone turned stern. "Linda, you need to be more careful." When Natalie came home late, my mother would smile. She was practicing with the cheer team. But when I stayed behind to help a classmate study, she sighed. "You're always trying to prove something." Each of those words was like a fine thread, weaving a tapestry of quiet injustice around me, tightening over the years until I learned to breathe softly enough not to disturb anyone. Natalie had always been the golden girl, beautiful, charming, effortlessly likable. She never had to try to be loved. I, on the other hand, had to live perfectly, behave properly, just to be tolerated. When Natalie went to college in California, Mom sent her care packages every week. When I studied at Oregon State, all I got was a text. "Don't forget to call your sister." Every time Natalie came home, she filled the house with stories of her wonderful life, her job at a big insurance company, her admired colleagues, her perfect boyfriend, Sean. For a while, I thought at least she'd found happiness. But I later learned that, for Natalie, happiness only mattered when it made someone else feel small. I remember her wedding vividly 10 years ago, in a riverside garden along the Tualatin. I hadn't wanted to be a bridesmaid, but Natalie insisted. "You can't say no to me, Linda. I'm only getting married once in my life." Eventually, I agreed. She sent me the dress sample champagne gold, she said, and told me all the bridesmaids would wear the same color. I ordered it exactly as she described. But on the wedding day, she looked at me with that sharp glare, then turned to Mom and whispered just loud enough for the guests to hear. "See, I told you Linda always has to be the center of attention." She picked a lighter shade to stand out more than me. Every head turned toward me. Before I could speak, Mom laughed and said, "Oh, Natalie, don't be petty, it's just a dress." But I caught the look of agreement in her eyes. For the rest of the evening, I sat at the far table while Natalie floated through the crowd, hugging guests, posing for photos, basking in the spotlight like she was on stage. And honestly, I stopped expecting them to. I just remember standing under the row of trees by the river, listening to the wind and quietly promising myself, I'll never let anyone make me feel small again. Aww? But that promise is hard to keep when the ones who make you feel small are your own family. After the wedding, every holiday became another perfect performance by Natalie. It was always the same. She'd arrive late, coat draped over her shoulders, designer bag in hand, laughing as she said, "Sorry, traffic was awful." Portland during the holidays, what can you do? Everyone laughed and saved her the best seat. I'd usually be in the kitchen helping Mom with the dishes, listening as Natalie talked about her new house in West Lynn, her husband Sean, the quiet, gentle man who adored their son so much he'd spend hours folding origami with Scott. When she talked about her child, Natalie always emphasized, "my little genius," as if no other kid could ever compare. I never saw real affection in her eyes, only the need to prove something. I remember one Christmas, the year before. David had just finished his first school experiment on DNA structure. He was so excited, explaining genetics to everyone at the table, his little hands moving as he spoke. Natalie chuckled lightly. "You really are the classic nerd type, Linda," she said. "Always raising kids who'd rather play in a lab than outside." The whole table burst out laughing. Dad added, "Natalie, you're so charming." Then turned to me and said, "Linda, don't push him too hard, okay? Boys need to be kids too." I stayed silent, smiling just enough to appear polite, but it never reached my eyes. I had tried standing up for myself before telling Mom that Natalie's words weren't just jokes, but Mom would always reply, "You know how your sister is. Don't be so sensitive." That phrase, "you know how your sister is," became the wall that shut down every attempt I ever made to be heard for the last 30 years. Ethan understood everything. He never said it out loud, but every time I fell silent after another family dinner, he would simply place his hand on my back, gently, as if to say, "I'm here." We chose silence not because we feared Natalie, but because of David. I didn't want my son to grow up surrounded by that tension, didn't want him to learn endurance the way I did by swallowing pain until it became invisible. So every year, I returned to that same house, sat under the same blinking lights, listened to Natalie's stories about vacations in Hawaii, heard Mom sigh, "Natalie's so blessed," and told myself, just make it through tonight, and it'll all be fine. But peace in my family has always been the most fragile thing. It survives only through pretending, through hollow hugs and forced laughter. And that pretending is what fed the poison inside Natalie. It made her believe she could say or do anything, that she was untouchable. Until one day, it wasn't enough for her to be adored. She wanted proof that she could destroy anyone who made her feel small, even the sister who had spent her whole life bowing her head to her. I just never imagined the weapon she'd choose. A small DNA kit tucked inside a Christmas gift would be the first stone that shattered the perfect world she'd spent years painting. From the day David was born, I learned that happiness in my family always came with a price. When the nurse placed him in my arms, his eyes opened blue, clear, and bright like a spring lake. Ethan joked that he must have inherited them from his great-grandmother in Michigan, but my mother pressed her lips together, her face caught somewhere between awkwardness and quiet calculation. I didn't care at that moment, all I felt was joy. But then Natalie's innocent remarks began to drip into that joy like drops of medicine into clear water. Each drop too small to notice, but together, they turned into poison. The first time she hinted at it was during David's first birthday. In the middle of the party, she leaned across the table, glanced at him sitting in his high chair, and said sweetly, "His eyes are such an unusual blue, especially since Ethan's got brown hair, and so do you. Genetics really are mysterious, aren't they?" Everyone laughed, Mom the loudest, adding, "Oh, must take after the father's side." And I just sat there, silent, watching my reflection warp in the curve of a silver spoon. The second time was at Thanksgiving when David was 3. She was telling some story at the dinner table, then suddenly turned to me. "You know," she said, "one of my coworkers has a daughter who looks nothing like her husband. Everyone jokes there must have been a little mix-up in the genes." Then she laughed, pretending she'd misspoken. I smiled, pretending I didn't notice. But inside, something cold and heavy began to rise. I remember driving home that night, Ethan whispering, "Don't let it get to you. Natalie just wants a reaction." I nodded, but I knew I had already reacted, just not on the outside. In the years that followed, Natalie never stopped. At every meal, every family gathering, she'd find a way to bring it up David's eyes, genetic surprises, her little jokes that sliced beneath the surface. My mother would smile awkwardly. My father would change the subject. And I learned to smile without feeling. It was like wearing a mask, the mask of the polite sister, the obedient daughter, the woman who shouldn't make a scene. But inside, every time she laughed, I could feel a rope tightening slowly around my throat. The older David grew, the more he looked like Ethan, the same way he sat, the same furrow of his brow when he thought, but Natalie still wouldn't stop. One evening, when David was 8, we went to my parents' house for dinner. As he proudly showed everyone the robot model he had built from scratch, Natalie smiled and said, "He's really smart, must have gotten some unusual genes in there." I heard the way she lingered on the word unusual. Mom quickly cut in. "Oh, stop it with all that gene talk. Just eat." I looked at her then, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. Her silence wasn't ignorance, it was fear. Fear of breaking the fragile peace she and Dad spent their lives protecting. That peace was their sacred order, an unspoken pact to keep the family image spotless, even if the truth underneath was warped. Natalie understood that better than anyone. She thrived on it. She knew that all she had to do was say something vague, something that sounded harmless, and people would start to wonder. She didn't need proof, she only needed suggestion. And for years, I let her do it because I thought I was stronger, because I believed I understood her game, because I told myself I was immune to the poison Natalie dripped into our lives, drop by drop. But endurance has its limits. And silence has consequences. When David started high school, he became her new target, and this time, it wasn't just playful teasing. She began sending me articles about parents discovering their child wasn't biologically theirs, adding little notes like, "Just a funny read, don't overthink it." Once, she even sent David a video about DNA testing and texted, "You should try it, it's fun." I laughed it off, set my phone aside, convincing myself I was too strong to react. I was wrong. Because every time she planted doubt, it wasn't just me who suffered, it was David too. I realized that one night when he sat at his desk, the lamplight reflecting in his sad blue eyes. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked. He shook his head, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, do I look like Dad?" I froze. "Why would you ask that?" He hesitated, then said, "Aunt Natalie said maybe I look like someone else." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. I pulled him into my arms, feeling my heart pounding wildly. He didn't understand everything, but he felt it, the quiet cruelty hidden inside a grown-up smile. Back in the present, snow had already blanketed the streets of Lake Oswego. Headlights cut through the white, reflecting a faint orange glow off the frozen surface. Inside the car, no one spoke. David sat in the back seat, holding the DNA kit box on his lap like it was the most precious thing in the world. Through the rearview mirror, I watched him carefully reading the printed instructions, his blue eyes glowing beneath the passing streetlights. Ethan exhaled softly, then spoke in that calm, steady tone he always used. "We're going to do the test," he said. I turned to him. "For what?" "Not to prove anything to her," he said quietly. "But to end this. Once and for all." Outside, the snow was falling heavier, clinging to the windshield like smudged streaks of frost. In my head, Natalie's voice still echoed, "Let's see if he takes after his dad or someone else." A short sentence, but it had seeped into every crack of my peace, leaving behind both pain and anger. "I don't know," I murmured. "I'm not afraid of the truth, Ethan. I'm afraid of cruelty." He glanced at me, the streetlight washing over his face, catching in his calm brown eyes. "Then don't be afraid of anyone, Linda," he said. "And we're not going to let anyone teach our son to fear the truth." All's thick. When we got home, we were still in our holiday clothes, thick sweaters, snow-dusted shoes. Ethan placed the gift box on the kitchen counter and switched on the lights. The warm yellow glow filled the small kitchen, wrapping it in gentle heat. David rushed over, eager. "Can I do it now, Mom? It just needs a saliva sample and then we send it, right?" I looked at him, my heart tight with both love and ache. "All right," I said softly. "But wash your hands carefully and follow the steps exactly. We don't want your sample to get ruined." Ethan chuckled. Like mother, like son, both perfectionists. David read each instruction as seriously as a little scientist, then carefully filled the vial, sealed it, and shook it gently to mix the solution. "I want to see whether Mom's genes or Dad's are stronger," he said proudly. I laughed a real laugh, the first in what felt like forever. "If mine are stronger, you'll love books and coffee before you're 12. If your dad's are stronger, you'll spend every weekend gardening and fixing things." Ethan pretended to frown. "I just hope whichever genes win will help you finish your homework on time." We all laughed. For that brief moment, our small kitchen felt filled with light, not from the bulbs above, but from something deeper. The kind of light that only a real family can create. I labeled the sample tube, writing clearly, "David Scott," along with the date. My hand trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from the way my heart was beating faster than usual. Part of me wanted to believe this was all just a joke, that it would pass and fade like every other storm. But another part, the one Natalie had wounded over and over through the years, knew it wasn't. I placed the tube in the box, sealed it carefully, and looked at Ethan. He nodded. "I'll send it tomorrow." "Thank you," I said quietly. "No," he replied. "Thank you for not running from it." Oh. Later that night, I went upstairs, bathed David, brushed his hair, and tucked him into bed. As I pulled the blanket up, he whispered, "Mom, will Aunt Natalie be mad that I did this?" I paused. "Why do you ask?" "Because she gave it to me, and now I'm sending it away. Maybe she'll think I don't like her." I stroked his hair, smiling gently. "No, sweetheart, everyone has their reasons for what they do. Your job isn't to please people, it's to do what's right." He nodded softly, his blue eyes slowly closing. I sat there watching him fall asleep, listening to the wind whistling outside and the steady ticking of the clock. For the first time in years, I felt a clear line forming inside me, a boundary between fear and courage, between silence and truth, between living to endure and living to protect. Ethan came in, wearing his gray sweater, holding 2 mugs of tea. He set one in front of me. "I remember the first day we met," he said quietly. "You told me you never wanted a family unless it could be a safe place for your child. I think you've kept that promise. Our home is the safest place David could ever have." I looked at him, a feeling of relief and sadness washing over me at once. "I don't want to fight her," I said softly. "But I'm so tired of pretending nothing's happening." He nodded, his eyes steady. "Sometimes silence is a form of consent," he said. "And I don't ever want our son to think his parents consent to cruelty." That afternoon, I sent a screenshot of the results to the family group chat. No emojis. No dramatic message. Just one simple line. "Thanks for the Christmas gift, Natalie." Now everyone has their answer. I set the phone down and went back to work. 10 minutes later, the scene mark appeared beneath the message. Natalie had read it. No reply. My parents too silent. The group chat turned to stone. A digital void, soundless but heavy as lead. That evening, while I was washing dishes, the phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice trembled, a mix of anger and fear. "Linda, what are you doing? Why would you send that? You've hurt your sister." I froze, the warm water on my hands suddenly feeling icy. "Hurt her?" I said slowly. "And when she made my son question his own father? When she poisoned our family table with her lies, did you think I was hurt then?" There was a pause. Then Mom's voice softened, almost pleading. "She was just joking. You know how your sister is." I let out a dry, bitter laugh. "Yes, Mom. I know exactly how my sister is. The problem is you know too, and you never stopped her." I hung up before she could say another word. I stood there, hands still wet, staring out the window. Rain had started to fall. Portland always did this, snow followed by rain, silence followed by noise, as if the sky itself couldn't make up its mind. I thought of Natalie, imagined her face when she read my message. Maybe she'd throw her phone, or maybe she'd cry to Mom, claiming I'd humiliated her. But I didn't care anymore. I was done maintaining peace that never existed. Done playing the good little sister who knew her place while others got to tear things apart without consequence. That night, Ethan printed the results, slipped them into a hard folder, and placed it in the drawer. "So one day, if David wants to see it, he'll have the proof," he said. I looked at him and whispered, "It still bothers me. Not because I ever doubted you, but because I had to prove something no one should ever have the right to question." He nodded. "I know. But maybe sometimes you have to burn every shadow before the light can return." He took my hand, his grip firm. "We won, Linda, it's over." I nodded, but deep inside, I felt something stir. A quieter silence, darker and deeper, rising from somewhere I couldn't name because I knew Natalie. And Natalie never accepted defeat over a single message. In the days that followed, no one mentioned it again. Mom kept sending photos of family dinners, still texting things like, "Your father asked when you'll come visit." Natalie didn't reach out at all. But I could feel the shift, something dark, quietly churning beneath the surface of normalcy. Like a lake that looks calm, while underneath, the current rages unseen. I'd known Natalie too long not to recognize that her silence was never peace, it was calculation. One Sunday morning, while David and I were making cookies, he looked up and asked, "Mom, is Aunt Natalie mad that I sent the DNA test?" I smiled, bending down so our eyes met. "It's okay, sweetheart. Sometimes adults forget the most important thing: truth is never something to be ashamed of." He nodded thoughtfully, then went back to rolling dough. I watched him, feeling a strange kind of tenderness, soft but firm, fragile yet fierce. I used to endure to keep a family together. Now, I endure to protect my child from the same kind of silence I grew up inside. 3 weeks passed after I sent that message to the family chat. Everything seemed to settle. Natalie stayed quiet, Mom avoided the topic. David had all but forgotten the DNA kit that once set off a storm. I wanted to believe it was over, that truth had the power to make people stop. But, as always, truth only ever lights the match, and the next one to fan the flames was never me. It was a Friday evening. I was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when my phone rang. The name on the screen made me pause. Sean, Natalie's husband. He rarely called me directly, only occasionally texting to ask about David or getting Ethan's advice on their greenhouse. His voice on the phone was rough, low, nothing like his usual calm tone. "Linda, I need to see you. And, Ethan, just the two of you. No one else." I frowned. "What's going on?" He hesitated, then said, "Just meet me. You'll understand when you do." The way he said it made the back of my neck go cold. We met at a small cafe near downtown Portland, the kind with red brick walls and the warm, rich scent of freshly roasted coffee lingering in the air. I remember that day clearly. A light rain was falling, the streetlights casting blurred reflections across the wet pavement. When Ethan and I walked in, Sean was already there, gripping his coffee cup so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. He looked up, and I saw the dark circles under his eyes, deep and hollow like someone who hadn't slept in days. I don't even know where to start," he said, his voice trembling. Ethan placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Take your time. What happened?" Sean swallowed hard, forcing a strained smile. "Scott wanted to do a DNA test. After David showed him his kit, he got curious and said he wanted to try it too. I thought it was harmless, just kids being curious, so I ordered 3 kits. One for me, one for Scott, one for Chloe. I figured it'd be a fun way to teach them about science." He paused, his eyes reddening. "Natalie didn't like it. She said it was a waste of money, pointless, but I sent them in anyway. I didn't think twice. I swear, I thought it was nothing more than a little experiment." He stopped, staring down at the table, his hands trembling slightly. "And then the results came yesterday." I felt my heartbeat tighten in my chest. "And?" I asked quietly. Sean lifted his head, his voice cracking. "Neither Scott nor Chloe are biologically mine." The air around the table seemed to thicken instantly. The hum of the espresso machine faded into the distance, blending with the soft patter of rain against the window. Ethan's hand closed around mine, firm and grounding, but I felt nothing, just a spreading numbness. "Are you sure?" I asked slowly. He nodded. Then, without a word, he opened his laptop and turned the screen toward us. On it were 3 names, 3 identification numbers. Beneath the line, "paternal match," were 2 stark words, "no match." I read it over and over, he whispered. I even sent in a second set of samples, just to confirm. It came back the same, "There's no mistake." He leaned forward, burying his hands in his hair, shaking. "I've been raising someone else's children for 13 years, Linda. 13 years. And I love them, God. I love them so much. Even now, knowing this, I still do." His voice broke completely. I saw tears fall onto the table, darkening the wood, merging with the small splash of spilled coffee he hadn't noticed. No one spoke for a long time. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my chest, a dull ringing building in my ears. In my mind, I saw Natalie's face, the way she used to smile when she said, "Genetics really are mysterious." And suddenly, all the old fragments snapped together, her constant excuses, the times Sean mentioned, "Natalie's been working out a lot lately, she has a personal trainer," the phone calls she ended abruptly whenever he walked into the room. A chill ran through me. "What are you going to do now?" Ethan asked, his voice steady. Sean exhaled hard, wiping his face. "I don't know. I don't want to blow up, at least not in front of the kids. None of this is their fault, but Natalie, she's known about this for years. I'm sure of it." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a hotel receipt. "Found this in her car last week. The dates line up exactly with when Chloe would have been conceived." He gave a short, hollow laugh. "I don't need a scientist to tell me what that means." I looked at him, and in his eyes, I saw the kind of pain that doesn't scream, it collapses inward. Not the violent kind, but the quiet breaking of a man who's lost both his family and his faith in love. "Have you talked to her yet?" I asked. "Tonight," he said. "But I'm scared, Linda. Not just of what she'll say, but of what she'll do. I know her. She'll twist this. She'll find a way to make it someone else's fault. You know that better than anyone." I nodded, the back of my eyes stinging. "I know. And you're right, she won't take responsibility. She never has." Sean stood, closing his laptop. His voice was hoarse when he spoke. "Thank you for listening. I just needed someone who understands." He paused before leaving, then turned back to me. "If Natalie hadn't given your son that DNA kit, I'd still be living in her lie. It's ironic, isn't it? The trap she set for you ended up exposing her own." "How dare?" I sat there for a long time after he left, staring at the golden light pooling across the table. Outside, the rain had grown heavier. Ethan placed a hand on my shoulder and said quietly, "Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with a bang, it shows up as an email." I looked out the window, watching people hurry through the rain, and whispered, almost to myself, there's nothing more ruthless than truth finding its own way home. And this time, Natalie will have to face it whether she wants to or not. Dead. That night, Portland was swallowed by rain, as if the whole sky wanted to wash something clean. But inside the house in West Lynn, nothing was cleansed, only the sound of shouting, breaking, and the unraveling of secrets that no longer had anywhere to hide. Sean told me later that when he walked in, Natalie was sitting on the sofa, still perfectly made up, red lips gleaming, a glass of wine in her hand as if nothing around her had begun to collapse. He stood at the doorway, rain dripping from his coat. "We need to talk," he said. Natalie didn't even look up. Her tone was cold, cutting. "If this is about that ridiculous DNA test, save it. You're wasting your time." Sean took a long breath, stepped closer, and placed his laptop on the table. "I have the results confirmed from 2 different labs," he said evenly. "And they both match." Natalie glanced at the screen and gave a short, dismissive laugh. "DNA tests? You actually believe those cheap gimmicks? They're wrong all the time." He didn't argue. Instead, he laid down a few more papers, hotel receipts, credit card statements, and printed screenshots of text messages he'd stumbled upon. "This date," Sean said quietly, pointing to one of them, "is the exact day Chloe was conceived." This time, Natalie didn't laugh. She stood abruptly, her face draining of color. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "You trying to destroy me?" Sean met her gaze, exhaustion and resolve etched into his face. "No, Natalie. You already did that yourself." The words landed like a blade, sharp and final. For a heartbeat, the room went still, then Natalie erupted, her voice raw and shrill. "You want to humiliate me, don't you? Just like her, like that Linda. You two are the same, both out to ruin me." The words burst out of her, soaked in venom and rage. Sean stared at her, frozen for a moment, then asked slowly, "What are you talking about? What does Linda have to do with you cheating on me?" Natalie bit her lip, her eyes darting, realizing too late that she'd said too much. But in her frenzy, she let the truth spill out, the one name that should never have left her mouth. "Fine, you want to know? It was Derek. My trainer. He's the first man who ever made me feel alive, not like a shadow orbiting some dull husband like you." Our fifth. The room fell silent. Outside, the rain hammered harder, howling through the trees and beating against the roof. Sean just stood there, not angry anymore, just hollow. The kind of silence that comes after you've run out of tears. He closed the laptop slowly, his voice hoarse. "Thanks for confirming." Then he turned and walked upstairs, not shouting, not breaking anything, just quietly packing a few things into a suitcase. When he came back down, Scott and Chloe were standing at the bottom of the stairs, eyes wide, frightened. He knelt down, taking his son's hand. "Buddy, grab your things. We're going away for a few days." Scott looked between his parents, confused, but nodded. Chloe began to cry. "Daddy, isn't Mommy coming with us?" Sean's voice caught in his throat. He swallowed hard, then whispered. It's okay, Angel, Daddy just wants you to rest for a while. He led the children toward the door. Rain splashed across his shoulders as he stepped outside, but he didn't care. He just held them tighter and opened the car door. Natalie rushed after him, screaming. You can't take them, they're my children. Sean turned back, eyes hollow, voice calm in a way that was almost terrifying. Yes, they are yours. Then he shut the door and drove away, leaving Natalie standing there in the downpour, her hair plastered to her face, red lipstick smeared like blood across her lips. I wasn't there that night. But a few hours later, I heard her voice through the phone. When her name flashed on the screen, I hesitated before answering. Her voice came through sharp and broken, like glass shattering midair. Are you happy now, Linda? You took everything from me. If it weren't for that damn DNA kit, he never would have found out. I stood in the kitchen, watching the rain slam against the window, wind howling through the chimney. No one took anything from you, Natalie. I said quietly, my voice steady. You did this yourself. You gave that DNA kit to my son, remember? On the other end of the line, there was a long silence, only the sound of ragged, uneven breathing. Then Natalie began to cry. Not the furious, screaming kind of cry I'd known from her before, but a broken, choking sob, raw and human. I didn't know what she was mourning more, the loss of a good man, or the shattering of the perfect image she'd spent her whole life building. I heard the sound of a glass hitting the floor, the sharp tinkle of it breaking, and then the line went dead. I stood there, frozen. Ethan walked in, resting a hand on my shoulder. She called? He asked. I nodded. What did she say? I took a slow breath. She said I destroyed her life. I replied softly. But really? I only held up the mirror she once used against me. Ethan didn't answer at first. He just looked at me for a long moment, then finally nodded. Someone like Natalie doesn't know how to lose, he said quietly. She'll try to save whatever's left, even if it's just ashes. I looked out into the dim light beyond the porch, watching raindrops slide off the roof and glimmer in the pale yellow glow. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, but another part knew better. Some wounds aren't inflicted by others. They're cultivated, fed, watered by pride and deceit until they become bottomless. And now, the pit she dug to bury me had swallowed her whole. 3 days after that tearful call, the phone rang again. This time, it was my mother. I was out in the garden, trimming the lavender pots along the porch. The air smelled of damp earth and the faint sweetness of rain gone by. She didn't greet me or ask how I was. She just exhaled sharply and went straight to it. Linda, I need your help with something. You have to tell Sean to withdraw the divorce. I froze, pulling off my gloves, bits of soil still clinging to my fingers. Withdraw the divorce? I repeated, as if I needed to make sure I'd heard her right. Yes, she said, her voice steady, detached, like she was discussing dinner plans. The family has to keep its dignity. What happened with Natalie was just a mistake. I know you're angry, but my daughter doesn't deserve to be humiliated like this. Lawn. I stayed silent. The wind picked up, rattling the chime that hung under the porch. Above me, the Oregon sky stretched gray and heavy, swollen with rain. Mom, I said slowly, the dignity you're trying to protect is just a mask for betrayal. I can't do that. The other end of the line went still for several seconds. Then her voice rose, sharp with outrage. What's that supposed to mean? She's still your sister. You're being cruel, Linda. You don't know how to forgive. Hi. I closed my eyes, holding my breath before answering softly. No, Mom, I do know forgiveness. I forgave every time she humiliated me. Every time you said, you know how your sister is. But this isn't about a dress or gossip anymore. This is about innocent children dragged into a lie that lasted 13 years. Forgiveness doesn't mean covering it up. Silence. Only the sound of her heavy breathing on the other end. Then she spoke again, her voice breaking. You don't understand, Linda. This family's been through enough scandal. If Sean goes public with this, Natalie won't survive it. I let out a dry laugh. She won't die from scandal, Mom. She'll die from the truth she built herself. I hung up before she could say another word. I sat on the stone bench beneath the porch, watching the drizzle start again. The air was cold, but inside me, everything felt sharp and clear. Some people only know love when they're forgiven. Others only learn change when they're forced to pay the price. And Natalie belonged to the latter. That night, I told Ethan what had happened. He listened quietly, then nodded. I figured as much, he said. They've never seen things through your eyes. To them, Natalie is the daughter they have to rescue, and you're the one they can lean on. He paused, then added. But this time, I think you should do more than just stay out of it. We can help Sean. I looked at him, hesitant. I don't want revenge. I know, he said gently. But there's a difference between revenge and protection. You know Natalie. If no one stops her, she'll keep destroying everyone around her, including those kids. He was right. I knew Natalie too well. She couldn't live without control, and if no one spoke up, she'd twist the story again, play the victim, and manipulate everyone just like she always had. I stayed quiet for a long moment. The wind gusted through the porch, making the chime tremble. Above, the Oregon sky hung heavy and dull. Mom, I said slowly. The dignity you're trying to protect is just a cover for betrayal. I can't do that. There was a pause, then her voice rose, sharp and indignant. What are you saying? She's still your sister. You're so cold, Linda. You don't know what forgiveness means. I closed my eyes, breathing through the ache in my chest. No, Mom, I said softly. I do. I forgave her every time she humiliated me. Every time you told me, you know how your sister is. But this time it's different. This isn't about dresses or rumors. This is about two innocent children caught in a lie that's lasted 13 years. Forgiveness doesn't mean protecting a lie. For a few seconds, all I heard was her shaky breathing. Then she said, voice thick with emotion. You don't understand, Linda. Our family's had enough scandals. If Sean tells people, Natalie won't survive it. I gave a bitter laugh. She won't die from the gossip, Mom. She'll die from the truth she created herself. And I ended the call before she could reply. I sat down on the porch bench, watching the rain start again. The air smelled of wet lavender and cold iron. For the first time, everything felt painfully clear. Some people only understand love when they're forgiven. Others only change when they're forced to pay for what they've done. Natalie was the latter. That night, I told Ethan. He listened, quiet and steady, then nodded. I figured that's what your mother would say, he murmured. They've never seen the world through your eyes. To them, Natalie's the daughter who needs saving and you're the one who's supposed to fix things. He paused. But this time, you should do more than step aside. We can help Sean. I looked at him. I'm not trying to get revenge. I know, he said. But there's a line between revenge and protection. And you know Natalie, if she's not stopped, she'll destroy everyone around her, even her kids. He was right. I knew her better than anyone. Natalie couldn't stand losing control of a story. And if no one spoke up, she'd twist the truth again, turn herself into the victim, and pull everyone back under just like she always had. I began gathering everything. Not to expose my sister, but to make sure the truth could no longer hide. I went through old emails, snide little messages, letters full of veiled contempt. It's okay, sis. Not everyone is born to be loved. I took screenshots of the conversations where she mocked Sean, the ones where she bragged about a man who truly knows how to make a woman feel wanted words. I now knew referred to Derek, the personal trainer. I printed everything, numbered each file, arranged them into folders. Ethan helped me organize the timeline, noting her patterns, manipulation, emotional abuse, and infidelity. That night, while David did his homework at the kitchen table, we worked in the living room under bright light. Ethan flipped through a stack of pages and said quietly, I never thought we'd have to do something like this to family. Neither did I said, but if we don't, no one will. The next day, I called Sean. He answered immediately, his voice rough but steady. Linda, he said, I'm guessing this isn't a sympathy call. I smiled faintly. No. I'm calling to tell you that if you need witnesses, Ethan and I will stand with you. We have proof not for revenge, but for justice. For the kids. There was a long silence on the line. Then I heard his voice tremble slightly. Thank you. You have no idea how much that means to me. After the call, I stood by the window. The rain outside had thinned to a mist. For years, I'd feared confrontation, feared shattering the fragile shell of peace that held our family together. But now I understood that shell was what had been suffocating us all along. Sometimes, to save a family, you have to let it collapse first. Ethan rested his hand on my shoulder, his tone low but resolute. From now on, we're not on the side of silence anymore. I nodded. In the golden light spilling through the rain-streaked glass, I saw my reflection calm, unafraid, and finally free of the need to be loved by people who only knew how to protect lies. I knew that after tonight, everything would change. But for the first time in my life, I was ready. The hearing took place on a gray Monday morning in March. Portland was damp and cold, the air thick with the scent of rain, car exhaust, and faint coffee. I stood outside the Clackamas County Courthouse, my long coat pulled tight, a folder clutched in my hand, the one Ethan and I had spent weeks assembling. Inside were pages of proof, emails, messages, receipts, words that had once seemed harmless but now revealed the architecture of an entire false life. Sean walked up, his face drawn and pale, but his eyes steady. He nodded once. No words were needed. We both knew that today wasn't just about a divorce, it was the day the truth would finally speak for itself. The courtroom was small, the beige paint on the walls slightly peeling, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly with their cold, sterile glow. The air smelled of old paper, dust, and stale coffee from the plastic pot in the corner. Natalie sat at the opposite table, wearing a crisp white blouse, her hair neatly tied back, her makeup done just enough to appear tired but graceful. I recognized the performance immediately, the glistening eyes, the trembling hands, the subtle tilt of her head, the same choreography she'd always used to make people believe she was the victim. But today, that act looked heavier, like even she no longer believed it. Beside her sat her attorney, a young woman with sharp heels and practiced poise, but I noticed her glance nervously at the thick stack of files in front of Sean. The judge, Mrs. Lawson, entered, her voice low and firm. This court is now in session for the hearing of Scott versus Scott, concerning divorce, custody, and related financial matters. Sean lifted his head. Natalie kept hers down, shoulders trembling ever so slightly. I sat in the last row between Ethan and Sean's legal advisor, my heart steady but slow, echoing faintly beneath the rhythmic tapping of the court clerk's pen. Sean's lawyer, Julia, a small, composed woman with short hair and eyes sharp as glass, stood first. Her tone was clear and deliberate. Your Honor, Mrs. Natalie Scott engaged in an extramarital relationship with a man named Derek Hunt, a personal fitness trainer, for over 7 years both before and during her marriage to Mr. Sean Scott. We have verified financial records, digital correspondence, and a written statement from Mr. Hunt confirming the affair. She laid a folder on the table. For the record, Exhibit C, messages dated May 12, 2017, in which the defendant admits, quote, I may have kept things with Derek going longer than I planned. The courtroom went utterly still. Natalie didn't lift her head. Julia continued, her tone measured, precise. We also have credit card statements showing multiple transactions at the River Edge Inn in Eugene, dates that align with the conception periods of both children. And this, she held up a paper, is a letter from the school counselor where the couple's eldest son, Scott, is enrolled. In it, the boy writes, Mom told me not to tell Dad. I don't know what to do. I think I have to lie so she won't be sad. Her voice didn't waver. It wasn't angry or emotional. It was calm, exact, and every word sliced through the air like a blade. Natalie finally looked up, her eyes red, tears streaming. All of this is lies, she cried. He's cold, controlling, he's been suffocating me for years. I didn't have a choice. Her voice cracked, her gaze darting around the room, searching desperately for sympathy. But Sean just sat there, his hands clasped together. The cold white light fell across his face, revealing the deep hollows under his eyes, not with rage, but with a grief so profound it almost silenced the room. It was the look of a man who had loved too deeply and been betrayed for too long. Natalie's lawyer tried to recover, her tone urgent but wavering. Your Honor, my client suffered from postpartum depression. Her actions were not driven by malice, but by psychological distress. We ask the court to take that into consideration. Judge Lawson didn't respond to the attorney. Instead, she turned her gaze toward Natalie and asked, in a low, even voice, Mrs. Scott, do you deny that the two children are not biologically related to your husband? Natalie's mouth opened, then closed again. Her lips trembled, but no sound came out. The silence that followed was louder than any confession. Then Julia called my name. I rose from my seat, walked to the stand, and placed my hand on the Bible. My voice was steady as I took the oath. When I lifted my eyes, Natalie was staring at me, her look, a mixture of fury and pleading. I met her gaze without flinching. Julia began. Miss Linda, can you tell the court what you have personally witnessed regarding the defendant's behavior over the past years? I took a deep breath. I've known my sister, Natalie, my whole life. She has a habit of using emotions to manipulate through tears, through pity. She didn't just deceive her husband, she sowed suspicion within her own family. She once gave my son, David, a DNA kit for Christmas, implying that my husband wasn't his real father. When the results proved otherwise, she didn't stop, and because of that act, it was her own son who became curious enough to take a test only to discover the truth about his bloodline. No one destroyed Natalie. She did that to herself. The courtroom was completely silent. I could hear the rapid scratching of the clerk's pen, the faint sigh from Judge Lawson. Julia looked at me and asked one final question. In your opinion, Miss Linda, who has suffered the most in all of this? I glanced at Sean, then pictured the children Scott and Chloe, their bewildered faces caught in a storm they never created. The children, Your Honor, I said calmly but firmly. Because they're the ones who now have to learn the difference between love and deception from their own mother. When I stepped down from the stand, Natalie's head was bowed, tears sliding down her cheeks. But I knew they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of self-pity, shed for the collapse of the perfect image she'd spent her life protecting. At last, Judge Lawson delivered the verdict. Her voice was low, steady, and without sentiment. After reviewing the evidence and testimony, this court grants primary custody of the two minor children to Mr. Sean Scott. Mrs. Natalie Scott is permitted supervised visitation only, in a neutral setting. Regarding financial matters, due to a breach of ethical conduct in the family trust, the defendant is hereby removed from the list of beneficiaries. She paused, eyes scanning the document before her. The sum of $50,000 from said trust will be transferred to the legal guardian, Mr. Scott, to ensure the educational future of the children. I turned toward Natalie. She sat motionless, the cold fluorescent light bleaching her face pale. Her lips trembled, her eyes empty, as if someone had drained the air from her lungs. Sean bowed his head, hands clasped tightly together, eyes closing for one long, heavy second. The courtroom emptied in silence. As everyone filed out, I stayed behind for a moment. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee, old paper, and that heavy stillness that always follows justice when it's finally spoken aloud. Ethan came over, draped my coat over my shoulders, and murmured, "It's over." I nodded, but what I felt wasn't victory, just a quiet kind of exhaustion that somehow felt clean. Outside, I saw Sean kneeling to embrace Scott and Chloe. The two children clung to him tightly, even without shared blood. They knew love when it held them. I whispered, mostly to myself, "Justice isn't revenge, it's the world finding its right shape again." And in that moment, I realized some wounds don't need forgiveness to heal, they just need truth. After the trial, spring arrived in Portland, but the air within my family felt colder than ever. Sean moved out of the old house in West Lynne and rented a small place by the Willamette River. Ethan and I helped him pack just a few boxes of clothes, some toys, and a family photo Sean insisted on keeping, even though Natalie's face was in it. "I'm not keeping it for her," he said, voice rough with fatigue. "The kids need to know they once had a family, even if it only exists now in memory." Endertown. Scott and Chloe moved in with him and began therapy at a child counseling center. Scott, at 13, had grown unusually quiet, his eyes wary whenever someone mentioned his mother. Chloe, just 7, asked a single question that broke everyone's heart. "If I'm not really her daughter, will she still love me?" Sean bent down, pulled her close, and said softly, "You're my daughter, and I'll love you for the rest of my life." I visited them a few times each week. Scott began to open up more, especially when David came over. The two boys would build Lego cities again, talking about science, robots, and all the things children believe can fix the world. Once, I overheard Scott say to David, "DNA can tell you who gave you life, but not who loves you." It was such a simple sentence, yet it nearly brought me to tears. Natalie, on the other hand, completely fell apart. After the trial, she still tried to play the victim. On social media, she posted long, tragic paragraphs. "When the whole world turns its back on you, all you have left is yourself." Or, "They took everything from me, my husband, my children, my dignity, my future." Under each post, Mom was always the first to comment. "My strong girl, don't let anyone drag you down." And me, I said nothing. I had learned that people addicted to pity can't live without an audience, and my mother had always been her most loyal one. Then, the inevitable came. One evening, Mom called, her voice heavy, solemn, as if handing down a final verdict. "Linda, your father and I won't be coming to your house anymore. You've been cruel. You stabbed your sister in the back when she was already broken. This family doesn't need someone like you." I heard every word clearly, yet inside, I felt calm, peacefully detached. "Mom," I said slowly, "I'm not cruel. I just refuse to let our tradition of lies pass on to the next generation. If you choose to protect what's wrong, then I choose to protect my child." She stayed silent for a moment, then hung up. The call ended with that long, cold tone, short, hollow, final. Like a dial tone closing the last page of a childhood built on deceit. June arrived. Portland grew brighter, warmer. David began his summer with a science project titled DNA and Truth, What Genes Can't Hide. I helped him organize his materials while Ethan watched from the doorway, smiling. "He's definitely your son," he said. "He faces truth, even when it hurts." I laughed softly and shook my head. "No, he's braver than I am. I learned to endure. He wants to understand." That night, after David went to sleep, I opened his presentation. On the first slide, he had written, "DNA tells the truth about where we come from, but character tells the truth about who we are." Below it, he'd drawn a small family tree, just 3 branches. Mom, Dad, and me. Nothing more, nothing missing. One evening over dinner, Ethan looked at me and said quietly, "You know, through all that chaos, my biggest fear was that you'd lose faith." I set my glass down and met his eyes. I did faith in people, in fairness. But then I realized, truth doesn't need believers. It's always there, waiting for someone brave enough to look. He smiled, squeezing my hand. "That's what he got from you, courage in front of truth." I looked at him, my voice barely above a whisper. Maybe truth is the only gift left in this world that's still worth believing in. Outside, the summer wind carried the scent of lavender and the soft hum of crickets. I looked out into the yard where David and Scott were chasing fireflies with flashlights, their laughter echoing through the warm night. Somewhere in that sound, I thought I heard my own childhood laughter before it was buried beneath the sweetness of lies. But this time, the laughter was clear, real, untouched by bitterness. And I understood the storm had passed. Not because everything was forgotten, but because I had stopped letting it control me. The next Christmas arrived like a whisper. Portland was blanketed in white, the rooftops around Lake Oswego soft under the weight of snow. There were no loud family parties, no staged happy photos, only our kitchen, small, warm, and honest. Ethan stood by the oven baking apple pie, the scent of cinnamon filling the room. David was stringing lights around the window while I set the table, a few white candles, bowls of hot soup, and the bottle of red wine Sean brought. No extravagance, no expensive gifts yet in that little house, everyone was smiling. Not the kind of smile meant to please others, but the kind that comes when the burden of pretending finally lifts. When Sean and the kids arrived, snow still clung to their coats. Chloe ran straight to me, her cheeks flushed pink from the cold. "Aunt Linda, I brought you something," she said softly, as if afraid to break something sacred. I opened the small gift, a handmade card drawn with wax crayons. On it was a picture of 6 people standing beneath a Christmas tree. Me, Ethan, David, Sean, Scott, and Chloe. Below it, in uneven handwriting, were the words, "You're not our blood, but you're the first person who ever stood up for us." I stared at the card for a long time. My chest tightened, then broke open, not from sadness, but from something far rarer, the feeling of witnessing pure love. Love that asks for nothing. Love that hides nothing. I sat down and wrapped my arms around her. "Thank you, sweetheart," I whispered, my voice trembling. "You have no idea how precious this gift is." Chloe smiled, resting her cheek on my shoulder, her hair carrying the scent of new snow. Scott stood nearby, quiet but with a warmth in his eyes I hadn't seen before. In him, I saw something Natalie could never understand, the strength that comes from truth. He had endured, he had broken, but still chose love over bitterness. And I knew that choice, more than anything, would save him, not a mother who only knew how to play the victim. Dinner unfolded with gentle laughter, small stories, the soft clinking of silverware, and candlelight flickering over the oak table. David talked about his DNA and truth project, making everyone laugh. Sean poured more wine for Ethan, his expression lighter than it had been in months. "You know," he said, "sometimes I think, if it weren't for that stupid DNA kit, I'd still be living inside a lie." Ethan smiled faintly. "Sometimes a lie has to collapse," he said, "so that the truth can finally fit." Sean nodded slowly. "Yeah, maybe so." After dinner, I cleared the table while everyone else lingered in the living room, their laughter spilling through the doorway. I stepped out onto the porch. Snow was falling softly, white flakes landing on my palm, melting instantly into warmth. The light from inside cast a golden glow on the snow, wrapping the whole world in a fragile, tender brightness. I leaned against the railing and took a deep breath. What I felt wasn't just happiness. It was something quieter, peace that comes only after surviving everything. I thought of last Christmas, the cracked wine glass, the forced laughter, and the watchful eyes of the sister I once believed was family. A year had passed, and everything had changed. The woman who tried to use DNA to destroy my marriage now lived alone, still telling the story of her own victimhood. But I no longer cared. I didn't need to prove who was right or wrong. What I had learned was this: truth doesn't need believers. It only needs someone brave enough to stand beside it. I looked out into the yard, where David was building a snowman with Scott and Chloe, their laughter carrying through the cold night. Their breath rose in pale clouds, blending with the golden twinkle of Christmas lights. And for the first time, I felt gratitude even for the pain, the betrayal, the collapse of someone who once made my life unbearable. Because without all of it, I would never have learned that sometimes, loss is the universe clearing space for what's right to arrive. I smiled softly and whispered, almost to myself. My sister gave me DNA to destroy my marriage. But in the end, it was that same DNA that showed me who my real family truly is. Then I stepped back inside and lit the candle at the center of the table again. Its small, steady flame reflected in the window pane on my face, no longer tense or uncertain, but peaceful, strong, and free. Outside, snow kept falling, each flake light as a blessing from the sky. And inside that little house in Lake Oswego, surrounded by laughter, cinnamon, and the warmth of truth, I knew at last I was home.